The wind carried the scent of old violence. Dr. Catherine Marlowe caught it the moment she stepped from her rental truck, though she could not have named what she was smelling. Not decay, exactly. Not the usual mustiness of abandoned places. This was something older, sharper. The molecular memory of rage and gunpowder and spilled blood baked into earth over more than a century of silence. She stood at the boundary marker, squinting into the late afternoon sun. The sign was military issue, faded but still legible. Northern Exclusion Zone. Authorized personnel only. Unexploded ordnance risk. The words were a polite fiction. The real danger had nothing to do with old artillery shells. Catherine had spent 3 years convincing the review board to grant her access. 3 years of committee meetings and background checks and carefully worded grant proposals that danced around the truth. She was not here to catalog ruins. She was here to understand why the blood wars of 1892 had ended the way they did, and why the official history felt like a lie wrapped in leather bindings and academic credentials. Her boots crunched on gravel as she walked the approach road. The sound was too loud in the stillness. Everything here was too loud, too sharp, as if the air itself had been holding its breath for decades, and her arrival was the first exhale. She pulled her field jacket tighter. October in the Northern Territories was supposed to be cold, but this went deeper than weather. This was the cold of stone that had forgotten sunlight. Blackwood Citadel rose from the valley floor like a broken tooth. The walls were granite, 20 feet high in places, built by hands that understood siege warfare. The gate was gone, the great wooden doors having rotted away sometime in the last 100 years. What remained was a stone throat leading into darkness. Catherine paused at the threshold. Professional habit made her photograph the entrance. Historian's instinct made her note the sightlines, the overlapping fields of fire, the murder holes above where defenders could rain death on anyone foolish enough to force entry. This had been a fortress designed by someone who knew how men killed each other, someone who had seen it done and learned from it. She stepped through. The interior courtyard was larger than she had expected. Satellite imagery had not done it justice. This was not a ruin. This was a military installation that happened to be quiet. The distinction mattered. Ruins crumbled. They softened. They surrendered to vine and moss and the gentle entropy of time. Blackwood Citadel had done no such thing. The stones were too clean, the walls too straight. Someone had been maintaining this place. Catherine's pulse quickened. She was not a nervous woman. 2 tours embedded with Marine units in Iraq had cured her of easy fear. But this was different. This was the feeling of being watched by something patient enough to wait for her to make a mistake. She moved deeper into the complex, camera in one hand, digital recorder in the other. Her voice was steady as she narrated observations. Main courtyard, approximately 80 meters across. Defensive positions intact. Barracks to the north, armory to the south. Central keep straight ahead. The words were professional, detached. They did not match what she was feeling. The main hall was a cavern of shadows and dust motes. Catherine's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, picking out details. A hearth large enough to roast a cow. Tables overturned but not destroyed. Weapon racks empty but still bolted to the walls. And there, in the corner, something that made her stop breathing. A satellite phone. Modern. Maybe 10 years old. The battery was dead, but the casing was intact. Next to it, a stack of MRE packages. Expired 2015, according to the stamps. Someone had been living here, recently. Catherine's hand moved to the Glock 43 holstered at her hip. She had a concealed carry permit and 15 years of range time. The university had not asked if she was armed. She had not volunteered the information. Now she was grateful for the weight of it. The voice came from behind her, calm and measured and utterly without threat. "You are analyzing my defensive perimeter. Professional courtesy. What is your assessment?" Catherine spun, weapon-clearing leather in a smooth draw that would have made her firearms instructor proud. The man in the doorway did not flinch. He stood with his hands visible, palms open, the posture of someone who had been held at gunpoint before and knew the protocol. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with the build of someone who had carried heavy weight over long distances. His hair was dark, shot through with gray at the temples. He wore tactical pants and a weather-beaten field jacket over a thermal shirt. His face was all hard angles and old scars, the kind earned in close quarters fighting. His eyes were the pale gray of winter ice, and they assessed her with the same clinical precision she had used on his fortress. "Before you shoot," he said, "I am Theron Blackwood. This is my home, and you are trespassing." Catherine kept the pistol level, finger outside the trigger guard, muzzle pointed at his center mass. "The exclusion zone is government property. I have authorization." The exclusion zone is a legal fiction created to avoid explaining why this territory was never formally claimed after the Blood Wars. His voice had the cadence of someone who had written too many after-action reports. "You have authorization to enter a national park that does not exist. I have 132 years of continuous occupation. Which of us has the better legal claim?" She studied him, looking for the tells, the micro-expressions that separated truth from deception. "You are not 132 years old." "No," he agreed. "I am older than that. But I have been bound to this place for 132 years. There is a difference." Catherine's training warred with her curiosity. The smart play was to retreat, call her contacts at the university, report a squatter in the zone. The historian in her saw an opportunity. Primary source, living witness, possibly insane, but that was not disqualifying. "You are claiming to be Commander Theron Blackwood, the Alpha of the Northern Coalition, killed in action in 1892. Reported killed in action." His correction was precise. "The report was filed by Victor Steele's grandfather. Given that he was actively trying to kill me at the time, I question his objectivity." She lowered the weapon slightly, not holstering it, just signaling. "Prove it." "What would constitute proof, Dr. Marlowe?" The use of her name made her tense again. "How do you know who I am?" "You published a thesis last year, Tactical Failures of the Northern Coalition During the Blood Wars. It was the first academic analysis I have read in a century that did not treat my people as bloodthirsty savages who got what they deserved." He gestured toward a table against the far wall. "I have a copy. Would you like me to show you the notes I made in the margins?" Catherine's mind raced. This was insane. This was impossible. This was also the most interesting thing that had happened to her in 5 years of archive diving and committee meetings. "You read my thesis." "I read everything that comes through the exclusion zone, supply drops, weather reports, forgotten paperback novels left by survey teams. When you spend 132 years in one place, you develop an appreciation for outside perspective. Why did not you make contact before, if you have been here the whole time?" "Because the last time I trusted an official representative of the territorial government, they sent an assassination squad." His voice remained level. "I have learned caution." She made a decision that would have horrified her dissertation committee. She holstered the weapon. "Give me 24 hours. Answer my questions. If you are who you claim to be, this is the historical find of the century. If you are a very dedicated lunatic, I will know by morning." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Doctor." "I am very curious," she corrected, "and I did not drive 8 hours to turn back at the first sign of interesting." He stepped aside, gesturing deeper into the hall. "Then let me show you why I have been waiting." The next 6 hours passed in a blur of documents and dialogue. Theron Blackwood, if that was truly his name, had archives, meticulously organized, carefully preserved, documenting 132 years of continuous occupation. Personnel rosters, supply inventories, situation reports filed to a northern command that no longer existed. It was the paper trail of a man who had never stopped being a soldier. Catherine worked with the focused intensity that had earned her a doctorate by age 30. She cross-referenced dates, checked signatures against historical records, analyzed the tactical assessments against known outcomes of the Blood Wars. Everything matched. Either this was the most elaborate hoax in history, or she was sitting across a field table from a man who should have been dead for more than a century. "Tell me about the binding," she said as midnight approached. They had moved to a smaller room, what might have once been a command post. A fire burned in a stone hearth, more for light than warmth. "You keep referring to it. What does that mean?" Theron was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "Her name was Alara Moonwhisper. She was my Luna, my mate, and the reason the Northern Coalition lasted as long as it did. The records describe her as a battlefield healer. The records describe her as many things, most of them incomplete." He leaned forward, firelight carving harsh shadows across his face. She was a negotiator, a strategist, a woman who understood that power was not just about who could fight hardest, but who could build alliances that lasted. The Southern Pax feared her because she was better at politics than all of them combined, and Draven Steele killed her. Chancellor Draven Steele ordered her assassination during peace negotiations. The words came out flat, drained of emotion by sheer repetition. His reasoning was sound, from a military perspective. Remove the linchpin of the Northern Coalition, and the whole structure collapses. He was correct. It did. Catherine made notes, her historian's mind cataloging facts, even as her human heart recognized pain. But she did something before she died. The binding you mentioned. We were losing. Theron's hands clenched into fists, then slowly relaxed. Steel forces had us surrounded. Superior numbers, superior weapons, silver bullets that could kill us even in our shifted forms. Alara knew we could not win. She also knew that if we lost completely, if we were exterminated, the Southern Pax would have unchallenged control of the entire Northern Territory. She found that outcome unacceptable. He stood, pacing to the window. Outside, moonlight painted the courtyard in shades of silver and shadow. She was what our people call moon-chosen, born under specific celestial alignment, capable of magic that most shifters only read about in old stories. She used that magic to perform a working that should have been impossible. She bound my life force to this territory, made it so I could not leave, could not age, could not die. As long as I remained, the territory remained legally occupied. Steele could not claim it, could not erase us from history. That is quite a sacrifice. It was a tactical decision, Theron said quietly. She bought time for survivors to escape. She preserved our claim to the land. And she ensured that I would be here when circumstances changed, when someone like you came looking for the truth. Catherine set down her pen. That is quite a lot of faith to place in random chance. She did not believe in random chance. She believed in patterns, in cycles. He turned to face her. She told me right before the end that someone would come, someone who would see past the official history and ask the right questions. She made me promise to trust that person, to tell them everything. Even if that person was from the same government that tried to exterminate you, especially then. His smile was sad and knowing, because the only way to break cycles of violence is to trust people who have the courage to question their own side. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Catherine felt the weight of something shifting, some invisible threshold being crossed. She had come here looking for historical footnotes. She was finding something much larger and more dangerous. Why now, she asked. Why reveal yourself after 132 years? Theron moved to a cabinet against the wall, pulling out what looked like a modern tablet. Battery-powered, ruggedized military case. He tapped the screen, bringing up sensor data that meant nothing to Catherine at first glance. Then she saw the trend lines, all of them declining. Alara's binding is failing, he said simply. The magic that has held me here, that has protected this territory, is degrading. I estimate 6 months before complete collapse. When that happens, the wards fall, the legal protections vanish. Steel Dominion, which has spent 130 years pretending I do not exist, will move in and claim everything. This becomes parking lot or strip mall or government office building. The last physical evidence of what really happened here gets bulldozed into forgotten history. Unless you can prove legitimate claim to the territory. Unless I can prove it in a way that holds up in council court. With documentation. With witnesses. With someone who can translate a 132-year-old military claim into modern legal framework. He met her eyes. I need a historian, Dr. Marlowe. Specifically, I need you. Catherine's mouth was dry. You are asking me to stake my professional reputation on the claim that you are a 150-year-old werewolf bound by magical curse to a piece of land the government says does not exist. Yes. That is insane. Yes, he agreed. It is also true. And in 6 months, if you do nothing, the last chance to set the historical record straight disappears forever. How much is the truth worth to you? She should have said no. Should have thanked him for the interesting evening and driven back to civilization and sanity. Should have filed a report about a delusional squatter with impressive forgery skills. Should have done a dozen things that were smart and safe and career-preserving. Instead, she heard herself say, I will need to extend my access authorization, and I will need assurances that you are not going to murder me in my sleep. I have not murdered anyone in their sleep in 132 years. Theron said with absolute seriousness. "I see no reason to break that streak now." "That is disturbingly specific." "I was a soldier, Dr. Marlowe. Soldiers learn to be specific about violence." She stood, gathering her notes and equipment. "Where am I sleeping?" "Officers' quarters, East Wing. Relatively intact and only moderately haunted by the ghosts of bad decisions." He paused. "That was a joke. I am a historian. I am professionally comfortable with ghosts." Catherine did not sleep well. The quarters were as promised, intact and clean. Someone, presumably Theron, had maintained them. But every sound in the ancient fortress was amplified by darkness and isolation. Every creak of settling stone felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like whispered warnings. She lay on a surprisingly comfortable cot, staring at the ceiling, and tried to process what she had committed to. Academic suicide, probably. Career-ending foolishness, almost certainly. But also, potentially, the story of a lifetime. The kind of primary source access that won awards and rewrote textbooks. If any of it was true, if she survived the next 2 weeks, if she could convince anyone to believe her. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through narrow windows designed more for defense than illumination. Catherine rose, splashed water on her face from a basin that was too clean to have been sitting unused for a century, and made her way back to the command post. Theron was already there, staring at the sensor displays with the expression of a man watching a countdown to execution. He glanced up as she entered. "Coffee?" He gestured to a camp stove where a battered percolator bubbled. "You have coffee. I have supply drops. Government sends them monthly. Food, medicine, basic necessities. They think they are maintaining an empty quarantine zone. I do not correct them." He poured 2 cups with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made coffee in worse circumstances. "Powdered creamer in the cabinet. Sugar if you need it." She took the cup black. The coffee was terrible and wonderful in equal measure. "How much time do we have before people notice I'm still here?" "You filed for a 72-hour access window. We have 2 days before your university starts asking questions. 4 days before they send someone looking. Then we need to work fast." Catherine pulled out her laptop, calling up files she had brought. "I need to verify your documentation against independent sources. Personnel records, unit designations, tactical reports from the Southern PACs. If we are going to present this to any kind of official body, everything needs to cross-check." "You believe me." It was not quite a question. "I believe you believe what you are telling me. I need to verify whether reality agrees." She looked up from the screen. "No offense." "None taken. Verification is the foundation of good intelligence work." Theron settled into the chair across from her. "Where would you like to start?" They started with the easy things. Unit rosters, supply requisitions, documents that could be compared against archived military records from the period. Catherine had access to digitized collections from 3 major universities. Theron had original hard copies, yellowed with age but preserved with military precision. They matched. Every name, every date, every tactical designation lined up exactly. Then they moved to harder questions: battle reports, casualty figures, the specific sequence of events that led to the final assault on Blackwood Citadel. Here the official histories and Theron's accounts diverged. According to the Southern PAC records, the Northern Coalition had been the aggressors. According to Theron, that was a lie built on falsified intelligence. They needed justification, he explained, pulling out maps marked with patrol routes and engagement zones. Draven Steele was many things, but he was not stupid. He knew a war of extermination would not sit well with neutral PACs, so he manufactured a threat, staged raids, blamed them on Northern forces, created the narrative that we were destabilizing the region and needed to be put down for everyone's safety. Catherine studied the maps, comparing them to her own research. There were reports of Northern attacks, multiple incidents along the border territories. There were attacks, by forces wearing our insignia and carrying our weapons, except they were not our forces. Theron's finger traced routes on the map. Look at the timing. Look at the pattern. These raids happened during new moons, when our shifted senses were weakest. They hit targets that had no strategic value but high civilian casualties. They were designed to make us look like monsters. False flag operations. Exactly. I recognized it at the time, but I could not prove it. By the time I had evidence, Steele had already convinced the council we were the threat. His jaw tightened. He played the political game better than I did. I was focused on protecting my people. He was focused on controlling the narrative. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, breaking only when Catherine's eyes started to blur from screen fatigue. Theron proved to be an excellent research partner, able to recall specific details from decades past with the kind of clarity that came from reviewing them obsessively over a century of isolation. By sunset, Catherine had filled 3 notebooks and verified enough details to be certain of one thing. Either Theron Blackwood was exactly who he claimed to be, or he was the most sophisticated con artist in history. She was leaning toward the former. "We have a problem," she said as they ate a dinner of MREs and camp stove-heated soup. "Even if I can document your continuous occupation, even if I can prove Steele falsified the pretext for war, we still need to address the legal question of the binding. Any court is going to ask whether magical compulsion constitutes legitimate occupation or forced imprisonment." Theron nodded slowly. "I have considered this. The answer depends on whether I had agency during the 132 years. If the binding removed my free will, if I was nothing but a magical construct holding space, then Steele can argue I abandoned my post the moment the spell was cast. But you did not. No. I maintained the territory, filed reports, preserved records, continued to fulfill my duties as Alpha, even without a pack to lead." He met her eyes. "The question is whether anyone will believe that. We need witnesses, people who can testify to your state of mind, your continued agency." Catherine pulled up a new document on her laptop. "You said survivors escaped. Where did they go?" "Scattered. Most integrated into neutral packs. Some went east, some went west. A few stayed in the region, keeping their heads down." Theron was quiet for a moment. "There was one, Elena Ravencroft. She commanded the Eastern Defensive Line. Smart, pragmatic, survivor. If anyone made it through the last 130 years with their sense intact, it would be her." "Can you contact her?" "No. Part of the binding. I cannot leave the territory, cannot communicate beyond its borders without permission from whoever holds the wards." He gestured at the walls around them. "I am sovereign here and prisoner here at the same time." Catherine thought for a moment. "But I can leave." "You can. Then tomorrow I drive to Ravencroft territory, make contact, see if she is willing to testify." She paused. "How will I know her?" "She will be old now, late 70s at least. But she had a scar across her left eyebrow, shrapnel from an artillery burst, and she had a way of looking at you like she was calculating exactly how much trouble you were worth." Theron's expression softened slightly. "Tell her Blackwood sends his regards and an apology for not dying when I was supposed to." That is quite an opening line. Elena appreciates directness. They worked until late into the night, building the case that might save Blackwood Citadel from becoming a historical footnote. Catherine was exhausted, but energized in the way that came from finally finding the thread that would unravel a mystery. Theron was patient and thorough, answering every question with the precision of someone who had spent a very long time thinking about how to explain the inexplicable. Finally, as midnight approached, Catherine closed her laptop and leaned back. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "I will try." "Why me? You said Alara told you someone would come, someone who would ask the right questions. But there have been historians before, survey teams, government inspectors. Why am I the one you chose to reveal yourself to?" Theron was quiet for a long moment, studying the dying fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 132 years of isolation. "Because you wrote about us like we were people, not monsters, not footnotes, people who made decisions and paid prices and deserved to be remembered accurately." He looked at her. "Everyone else who came here was looking for artifacts or strategic resources or reasons to justify what Steele did. You were the first one looking for truth. That matters." Catherine felt something shift in her chest. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. The acknowledgement of finding someone who understood why the work mattered, why getting the story right was worth sacrifice. "I am going to help you," she said. "Not because I believe in magic or destiny or whatever Alara was prophesying, but because the historical record matters, because the truth matters, and because 132 years of filing reports no one reads is the most dedicated act of bureaucratic defiance I have ever encountered. That is perhaps the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a century. Do not get used to it. I am a historian, not a cheerleader." But she smiled as she said it. The next morning, Catherine loaded her truck and prepared for the drive to Ravencroft territory. Theron walked her to the gate, the furthest he could go without triggering whatever mystical tripwire kept him bound. "Be careful," he said. "If Steel Dominion has monitoring systems, they will notice your travel patterns. Questions may be asked." "I am a historian conducting field research. Questions are expected." She paused at the truck door. "How will I know if something goes wrong? If you need help?" Theron pulled something from his pocket. A small stone, black and polished smooth, covered in markings that looked like writing from a language Catherine did not recognize. "Ward Stone, keyed to the Citadel defenses. If the wards come under direct assault, this will heat up, enough to notice, not enough to burn." She took it, feeling the weight of obligations settling with the weight of stone. "I will be back in 3 days. Good luck, Dr. Marlowe." She was 10 miles down the access road when her phone buzzed. Signal was spotty in the exclusion zone, but here on the boundary, it worked well enough for messages to come through. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Text message. "Dr. Marlowe, this is Colonel Cassian Steele. I would like to discuss your research in the Northern Territories. Please call at your earliest convenience. I believe we have mutual interests." Catherine's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She kept driving, but her mind was racing. Theron had been right. Someone was watching. And now that someone wanted to talk. The game, it seemed, had just become significantly more complicated. Catherine did not call the number. Not immediately. She drove another 30 miles, putting distance between herself and the exclusion zone, before pulling into a rest stop that advertised coffee and public restrooms. She bought the coffee, black and bitter, and sat in her truck with the engine running and the heater fighting against October cold. The ward stone sat in her jacket pocket, a constant reminder of promises made and complications accepted. She pulled out her phone and stared at the message. Colonel Cassian Steele, the grandson of the man who had orchestrated the Blood Wars, the current military commander of Steel Dominion, a man whose family had spent over a century pretending Theron Blackwood did not exist. And now he wanted to talk about mutual interests. Catherine was not naive enough to think this was coincidence. Someone had noticed her travel patterns. Someone had connected her thesis on the Blood Wars to her presence in the exclusion zone. Someone was concerned enough to make direct contact. The question was whether that someone was offering opportunity or threat. She finished her coffee, made her decision, and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Dr. Marlowe, thank you for calling." His voice was younger than she expected. Crisp, educated, carrying the particular cadence of someone who had attended military academies where precision of speech was drilled into students alongside tactical doctrine. Not his grandfather's generation, not even his father's. This was a new breed of soldier, one who understood that wars were fought as much with information as ammunition. "Colonel Steele, you have me at a disadvantage. You seem to know a great deal about my research. I make it my business to know when historians start asking questions about my family's role in regional conflicts." No apology in his tone, just statement of fact. "Your thesis was quite thorough, also quite critical of certain tactical decisions made during the Blood Wars. I found it refreshing." Refreshing? Most academic analyses of that period are either hagiography of my grandfather's brilliant strategy or condemnation of Northern aggression. You actually examined the evidence and drew conclusions based on patterns rather than propaganda. That takes intellectual courage. Catherine's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want, Colonel?" "To meet. To discuss your current research. And to offer you something your new friend in the ruins cannot provide." He paused, timing it perfectly. "Context. I am capable of finding my own context." "Are you?" "Tell me, Dr. Marlowe, has Commander Blackwood explained to you what happens when a magical binding fails catastrophically? Has he mentioned the feedback loop, the energy discharge that could potentially kill everyone within a 5-mile radius?" The ward stone in her pocket suddenly felt heavier. "I will meet with you," she said carefully, "but not alone. Public location, my choice of venue. The truck stop where you are currently parked works fine for me." His tone was pleasant, conversational. "I am in the parking lot, black SUV, government plates. I came alone. You are welcome to verify that before you approach." Catherine's blood went cold. She scanned the parking lot through her windshield. There, 3 rows over, a black Suburban with tinted windows. As she watched, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. He was young, perhaps early 30s, with the build of someone who spent mandatory time in the gym but did not live there. His hair was military short, dark blonde going gray at the temples earlier than genetics probably intended. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a leather jacket, but he moved with the particular alertness of someone trained to assess threats and calculate responses. He raised one hand in a gesture that was half wave, half acknowledgement. Then he simply stood there, visible and vulnerable, giving her time to decide. Catherine made sure her pistol was accessible, checked that her phone was recording audio, and stepped out of the truck. They met halfway between vehicles, in the gray morning light of a rest stop parking lot that smelled of diesel fuel and old coffee. Up close, Cassian Steele had eyes the color of winter sky, and a scar through his left eyebrow that gave him a perpetually skeptical expression. He offered his hand. "Dr. Marlowe, thank you for being willing to talk." She did not take the hand. "You tracked me. You interrupted my research. You implied the man I am working with is a danger to public safety. I am not feeling particularly grateful." "Fair." He lowered his hand without offense. "Would you prefer to sit in your truck or mine? Or we can stand here like suspicious strangers if that makes you more comfortable." "Here is fine." "All right." Cassian leaned against the hood of her truck, casual but not dismissive. "Let me lay my cards on the table. My grandfather was Chancellor Draven Steele. He ordered the assault on Blackwood Citadel. He killed Alara Moonwhisper. He falsified intelligence to justify what was essentially a war of extermination. I am not here to defend him." Whatever Catherine had been expecting, it was not that. "You are confessing your grandfather was a war criminal." "I am acknowledging what the evidence supports, which, I note, is the same approach you took in your thesis. Facts over loyalty." He pulled a tablet from his jacket, called up a document, handed it to her. "These are my grandfather's personal journals. Declassified last year when my father was forced to step down from active command. He wrote extensively about his reasons for targeting the Northern Coalition, about his fear of what Alara represented, about his belief that moon-chosen magic was too dangerous to be allowed to exist in opposition to Steele interests." Catherine scanned the pages. The handwriting was old-fashioned, precise. The content was damning. Detailed plans for false flag operations, calculations about acceptable civilian casualties, strategies for controlling the post-war narrative. It read like the diary of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and felt entirely justified in doing it. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Theron Blackwood is not wrong about the history. My family built our power on a lie. We did commit atrocities. We did erase inconvenient truths." Cassian's voice remained level, professional. "But he is also not entirely right about the present situation." "Explain." "The binding Alara performed was not just a legal hold on territory. It was a magical construct that has been degrading for over a century. When it finally fails, and it will fail within 6 months, the energy release will be catastrophic. We have monitoring equipment, seismic sensors, magical resonance detectors. All of them show the same pattern: escalating instability leading to critical failure." He pulled up another document, graphs and data plots that meant little to Catherine but looked official and concerning. "If Blackwood is still within the boundary when collapse occurs, the feedback will kill him, possibly instantly, possibly slowly and painfully, but definitely, and anyone close to him at that moment shares the risk." Catherine felt the ward stone pressing against her ribs. "You are saying he is a bomb waiting to go off." "I am saying he is a victim of my grandfather's brutality, who is now trapped in a situation that could cost innocent lives, including yours." Cassian met her eyes. "I am not asking you to abandon him. I am asking you to help us contain the situation before people die." "Contain. Transfer the binding to a stabilization matrix. We have the technology. It will not free him, but it will prevent catastrophic failure. Give us time to find a permanent solution that does not involve anyone getting killed by magical backlash." It sounded reasonable. It sounded humanitarian. It sounded like exactly the kind of offer that had convinced people to walk into traps throughout history. Catherine handed back the tablet. "What do you get out of this? Your family has ignored Blackwood for over a century. Why start caring now?" Cassian was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been genuine regret. "My father spent his entire life defending my grandfather's legacy. It made him bitter and isolated, ruined his health. I watched that happen. I am not interested in repeating the pattern. If I can end this situation without more death, If I can acknowledge what my family did wrong and try to make it right, that matters to me. But if Blackwood refuses containment and people die because of magical fallout, Steel Dominion will be legally obligated to respond with force. And that ends badly for everyone involved, including you. There it was. The implicit threat wrapped in humanitarian concern. Help us help him, or we will stop him by other means. Catherine had seen this play before, in different contexts, with different stakes. The offer of the reasonable middle ground that somehow always seemed to benefit the party making the offer. I need time to think about this. You have 3 days, Cassian said. After that, I have to brief my superiors on your activities in the exclusion zone. And they will ask questions I currently do not have answers to. Questions about whether you are being held against your will, whether you are being influenced by someone who has been isolated for more than a century. Questions that lead to responses neither of us want. That sounds like a deadline with teeth. That is a statement of political reality. I am buying you time, Dr. Marlowe. Use it wisely. He straightened, preparing to leave. One more thing. If you do manage to contact Elena Ravencroft, ask her about the binding. Ask her what Alara said right before she cast it. Elena was there. She heard things Blackwood did not. It might change your assessment of whose version of events you should trust. He walked back to his vehicle, climbed in, and drove away without looking back. Catherine stood in the parking lot, cold wind cutting through her jacket, and tried to process what had just happened. Cassian Steele was not what she had expected. Not a villain, not clearly a hero, just a man trying to navigate the consequences of his grandfather's choices while managing current political realities. It made him harder to categorize, harder to dismiss. It also made him more dangerous. Catherine got back in her truck and drove. She had 3 days. She had questions that needed answering, and she had a growing suspicion that everyone involved in this situation was telling her the truth while somehow also lying. Ravencroft territory was 200 miles east, in mountain country, where the roads wound through pine forests and the cell service came and went like tides. Catherine made the drive in 4 hours, stopping only for gas and bad coffee. The ward stone stayed cool and quiet in her pocket. Whatever was happening at Blackwood Citadel, the wards were holding for now. The Ravencroft pack maintained a compound that looked more like a small town than a military installation. Houses clustered around a central commons. Defensive positions were present but subtle, designed to be effective without advertising paranoia. A guard post marked the main entrance, staffed by 2 wolves who looked young and alert and entirely capable of violence if circumstances required. Catherine pulled up to the gate, lowered her window. I am Dr. Catherine Marlowe. I am here to speak with Major Elena Ravencroft. It is about Commander Theron Blackwood. The guards exchanged glances. The older of the 2, a woman with gray-streaked brown hair and sergeant's bearing, leaned down to Catherine's window. Wait here. She disappeared into the guard shack. Catherine could see her making a phone call, speaking too quietly to overhear. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Catherine was beginning to wonder if she would be turned away when a vehicle approached from inside the compound. It was a jeep, military surplus by the look of it, painted in forest camouflage. The woman driving it was old, perhaps late 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. She had a scar through her left eyebrow. When she looked at Catherine through the windshield, it was with the expression of someone calculating exactly how much trouble a person was worth. Elena Ravencroft. The gate opened. Elena gestured for Catherine to follow. They wound through the compound in silence, finally parking in front of a building that looked like Combination Command Post and Community Center. Elena climbed out with the stiff movements of someone whose joints remembered old injuries. She did not speak until they were inside, door closed, coffee poured. So, Elena said, settling into a chair that had clearly been hers for decades. Blackwood is still alive. I wondered if the rumors were true. You knew? I suspected. The exclusion zone never made sense otherwise. Why cordon off a ruin? Why maintain monitoring equipment for empty territory? Someone was there. Someone they wanted contained but not killed. She sipped her coffee, eyes sharp over the rim. What does he want? Legal recognition, proof of continuous occupation, witnesses who can testify that his claim to the territory predates Steele's. And he sent a human historian to negotiate on his behalf, bold, also possibly stupid. He cannot leave. The binding keeps him prisoner. I know what the binding does. Elena set down her cup with controlled precision. I was there when Alara cast it. I heard what she said. I saw what it cost her. Has Blackwood told you the whole story? Catherine felt the conversation shifting, currents moving beneath the surface. He told me she bound him to protect the territory, to maintain Northern Coalition claim until circumstances changed. That is what he believes. That is not what she said. The room seemed very quiet suddenly. Outside, wind moved through pine trees. Inside, two women who had never met before sat across a table and dealt in truths that had been buried for over a century. What did she say? Catherine asked. Elena leaned back, eyes distant with memory. I was positioned on the eastern wall, covering evacuation routes. We knew we were losing. We knew the citadel would fall. Alara came to me right before the final assault. She said 3 things. First, get the children out. Second, survive and remember. Third, when the historian comes, tell her the binding was not punishment. It was mercy. Mercy. Blackwood wanted to die, wanted to follow Alara into whatever comes after, wanted to throw himself at Draven's forces in a suicide charge that would have accomplished nothing except giving him an honorable death. Elena's voice was flat, stating facts. Alara knew that. She also knew the Northern Coalition needed him alive, needed the hope that someone had survived, needed the legal claim to remain active, so she bound him to life, made it so he could not die even if he wanted to, forced him to keep living, keep waiting, keep hoping. That is not mercy, that is torture. That depends on your perspective. She gave him purpose, gave him a mission that only he could complete, kept him from wasting his life on a gesture. Elena met Catherine's eyes, but she also knew what it would cost him. A century of isolation, a century of waiting for relief that never came. She wept when she cast the spell, not for herself, for him. Catherine felt something shift in her understanding. Theron had described the binding as tactical necessity. Elena described it as an act of profound love and profound cruelty intertwined. Both could be true. Both probably were. Will you testify to this in council proceedings? That depends. Has Blackwood maintained sanity, or has isolation broken him into something dangerous? He files reports, maintains archives, preserves historical accuracy with military precision. He seems entirely sane. Seeming is not being. I need to see him, evaluate him myself. If he has held on to his honor, if he has not become the monster Steele propaganda claims, then yes, I will testify. Elena paused. But he cannot come here. The binding prevents that, which creates a problem. Catherine pulled the ward stone from her pocket, set it on the table between them. What if there was a way to temporarily transfer the binding? 24 hours, long enough for him to leave the citadel, long enough for you to meet with him and make your assessment. Elena stared at the stone, then at Catherine. That is moon-chosen magic. That requires blood and oath and risk. You are human. You are not trained. You are not equipped to handle that kind of power. I am the only option available, and I did not come this far to fail because I was afraid of risk. You barely know this man. Why would you take this on yourself? Catherine was quiet for a moment, searching for words. Because the historical record matters. Because truth matters. Because more than a century of filing reports no one reads is the most dedicated act of duty I have ever encountered. And because if I do not help him, he disappears. Everything he has maintained, everything Alara died to preserve, becomes parking lot asphalt and forgotten footnotes. Elena studied her with those sharp, calculating eyes. Finally, she nodded. All right, bring him to me. If he can leave the citadel for one day, I will test him. If he passes, I testify on his behalf. If he fails, I do not. Fair? Fair. One more thing. Cassian Steele contacted you, did not he? Catherine's surprise must have shown on her face. Elena smiled without humor. I have been in this game longer than that boy has been alive. I know when Steel Dominion starts moving pieces. What did he offer you? Safe containment of the binding, prevention of catastrophic magical failure, implication that people will die if we do not accept his help. And you are wondering if he is right. I am wondering if everyone involved is telling me truth while also manipulating me toward predetermined outcomes. Elena laughed, short and sharp. Now you are thinking like a soldier. Yes. That is exactly what is happening. Blackwood wants vindication. Cassian wants to clean up his grandfather's mess without admitting Steel Dominion's current power is built on genocide. I want Northern Pax to be remembered as more than casualties. Everyone has an agenda. What is yours? To make sure that when history is written, my people are not erased. To ensure that Alara's sacrifice meant something. To see one of the best soldiers I ever served with get justice. He has been denied for more than a century. Elena stood, joints creaking. I will help you, but understand this. If Blackwood has become the monster they claim, if isolation has broken something essential in him, I will be the first one to argue for containment. Loyalty to the dead does not override responsibility to the living. Understood? Good. Now get back into your cursed soldier and tell him Elena Ravencroft says he better still remember how to conduct himself like an officer. I will not tolerate sloppy military bearing just because he is 150 years old. Catherine made the drive back to Blackwood Citadel in darkness, her mind turning over everything she had learned. Elena's testimony about Alara's final words, Cassian's warnings about catastrophic failure, the growing certainty that she was caught in currents much larger than academic research. The ward stone stayed cool in her pocket until she was 10 miles from the exclusion zone. Then it began to warm, not painfully, just noticeably, a gradual increase in temperature that made Catherine's pulse quicken. Something was happening at the Citadel. She pushed the truck faster, racing down empty access roads, headlights cutting through darkness. The wardstone grew warmer, warm enough now that she moved it from her pocket to the cup holder, not wanting it against her skin. The Citadel appeared in her headlights like a ghost ship emerging from fog. Lights were on inside, not Theron's usual minimal illumination. Bright lights, emergency lights, the kind you used when you needed to see clearly to respond to threats. Catherine grabbed her pistol, left the truck running, moved toward the gate with the tactical awareness learned from years of embedding with military units in hostile territory. She could hear voices inside. 2 men. One was Theron. The other was unfamiliar. She entered the main hall to find Theron standing in the center of the room, hands empty and visible, facing 3 men in tactical gear who had weapons trained on him. The 4th man, clearly the leader, stood to the side with the relaxed confidence of someone who knew he controlled the situation. He was perhaps 40, built like someone who had spent time in special operations, with the particular alertness that never quite left veterans, even in supposedly safe situations. When he saw Catherine, his expression shifted to something like relief. Dr. Marlowe, good. You are safe. These men are with Steel Dominion Security. We are here to extract you from a potentially dangerous situation. Catherine kept her pistol lowered but ready. I am not in danger. Ma'am, this individual has been isolated for more than a century. He may not be mentally stable. We have protocols for this situation. Please come with us, and we will escort you safely out of the exclusion zone. I am a civilian researcher conducting authorized work. You have no authority to extract me. The team leader's expression hardened slightly. Ma'am, we have credible intelligence that magical containment is failing. For your safety and his, we need to remove him to a secure facility where proper containment can be established. Theron had not moved. His eyes met Catherine's across the room. In them she saw recognition. This was the scenario he had feared. This was the response Cassian had warned her about. But there was no panic, no rage, just the steady calculation of a soldier assessing odds and considering responses. Stand down, Catherine said to the team leader. I am documenting this as unlawful entry into protected historical site. I have recording equipment running. I have legal representation. And I have about 12 hours of verified research establishing that Commander Blackwood is not a threat to anyone except people who break into his home with weapons. We are not breaking in. We are responding to a security situation. A security situation you created by deploying armed response to confront someone who has not left his own property in more than a century. How is that proportional threat assessment? The team leader looked at Theron, then at Catherine, clearly recalculating. This was not going according to plan. The historian was supposed to be grateful for rescue. The prisoner was supposed to be unstable. Instead, he had a calm woman with a gun and a recording device, and a soldier who had not made a single aggressive move despite being outnumbered. Colonel Steele said you might be reluctant to leave, said you had formed attachment to your research subject. The team leader's tone was patient, the way you spoke to someone you thought was not thinking clearly. But attachment can cloud judgment. We just want to make sure you are making decisions based on facts, not emotions. Here are facts. I have documented continuous occupation of this territory by Commander Blackwood. I have verified his military records. I have established that the binding keeping him here is legal magical construct, not criminal imprisonment. And I have 3 days to complete my research before I brief my university on findings. Catherine's voice was cold, academic, the tone she used to shut down stupid questions at conferences. What I do not have is patience for armed intervention based on assumptions about my mental state. One of the tactical team members shifted slightly, attention divided between Catherine and Theron. The team leader noticed. He was losing control of the situation. He made a decision. All right, we will withdraw for now. But Dr. Marlowe, I strongly recommend you reconsider your position, for your own safety. He gestured to his team. They lowered weapons, began backing toward the door. Colonel Steele will want to speak with you directly, very soon. They left, efficient and silent. Catherine waited until she heard vehicle engines starting, driving away, before she lowered her pistol and let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Theron had not moved from his position in the center of the room. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something that might have been respect. That was well handled. That was terrifying. Catherine's hands were shaking now, adrenaline burn catching up with her. They were going to take you somewhere for containment and convenient disappearance. Yes, but they did not, because you stood your ground. He moved then, crossing to where she stood, his expression serious. You put yourself between armed soldiers and their objective. That took courage. That took stupidity. I am a historian, not a tactical operator. You are someone who understands that some fights matter more than safety. That is not stupidity. That is principle. He paused. What did Elena say? Catherine pulled herself together, forcing her breathing to steady. She will testify, but she needs to evaluate you first. She needs to see that isolation has not broken you, and for that, you need to leave the Citadel. Which brings us to a complication. She explained the temporary transfer ritual, the blood magic, the 24-hour window, the risk involved. Theron listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled as she spoke. No, he said when she finished. Absolutely not. I will not ask you to take that risk. You are not asking, I am offering. You do not understand what you are volunteering for. The binding is not just magical lock. It is weight, responsibility, the accumulated duty of more than a century of vigilance. It will be crushing. Then I will be crushed for 24 hours. I have handled worse. You have not handled this. And if something goes wrong, if you die while holding the binding, I die with you. Our lives become linked. His voice was sharp with an emotion Catherine could not quite name. Fear, maybe, or something deeper. I will not put that on you. Too bad. I am already committed. She met his eyes. Elena was right. The binding was not punishment. It was mercy. Ilara gave you purpose when you wanted death. Now I am giving you freedom when you think you do not deserve it. Accept the gift, Commander. He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not surrender, more like recognition. The acknowledgement that some arguments could not be won, and some offers could not be refused without insulting the person making them. If we do this, we do it properly, with preparation, with safeguards, with understanding of exactly what you are agreeing to. Agreed. They spent the next 12 hours preparing. Theron retrieved Ilara's notes on the binding ritual, handwritten instructions in precise script that had not faded even after more than a century. Catherine read them with the same focus she brought to decoding medieval manuscripts, asking questions, making sure she understood every step. Dr. Mira Thornfield arrived at dawn, summoned by encrypted message through channels Catherine did not fully understand. She was a small woman in her late 40s with the calm competence of someone who had performed field medicine under fire. She examined Catherine like a patient about to undergo risky surgery. Your vitals are good. Blood pressure slightly elevated, but that is expected given circumstances. Any history of seizures, cardiac problems, adverse reactions to pharmaceuticals? No. Good. Because you are about to experience magical load equivalent to running marathon while being struck by lightning. It will hurt. A lot. The question is whether you can handle pain without losing consciousness. Mira's expression was serious. If you pass out while holding the binding, bad things happen. Maintain consciousness at all costs. Understand? Understood. They performed the ritual at noon in the same command post where Catherine and Theron had spent hours reviewing documents. Mira monitored equipment that looked like combination medical device and magical sensor. Theron prepared the materials with ritualistic precision. Blood, his and Catherine's. Ward stone dust ground into powder. Words in a language Catherine did not recognize but felt in her bones. "Last chance to back out," Theron said. "Not happening." He nodded once, accepting. Then he began to speak. The words were old. Older than the Citadel, older than the Blood Wars, older than the territorial conflicts that had shaped shifter politics. They resonated in Catherine's chest, in her blood, in spaces inside her she had not known existed. Theron's voice never wavered. He spoke with the absolute authority of someone issuing orders he expected to be followed. "By my authority as Alpha, by blood given freely, by oath sworn willingly, I grant stewardship of these wards to Catherine Marlowe. Let her stand in my place. Let her hold what I have held. Let her guard what I have guarded. For one day and one night she is sovereign here." The world exploded in sensation. Catherine gasped, her entire body locking rigid as something vast and terrible poured into her. It was like being struck by lightning while drowning, while burning alive. Every nerve screamed. Her vision whited out. She could feel the land, every inch of it, every stone and stream and living thing. Could feel the wards, ancient magic woven through earth and air, singing their protection. Could feel the weight of more than a century settling onto her shoulders like a mountain made of obligation. She heard Mira's voice from very far away. "Vitals spiking, heart rate 190, blood pressure critical. She is going into shock. Stay with me." Theron's hands on her face, forcing her to focus. "Catherine, look at me. Stay conscious. You can handle this." She could not handle this. This was impossible. This was too much. No one could carry this weight and remain human. But she had promised, and she had never broken a promise that mattered. Catherine focused on Theron's face, used it as anchor, forced her breathing to steady even though her lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. The pain did not lessen, but she learned to exist inside it, to function despite it. "Still here," she managed through gritted teeth. Something shifted in Theron's expression. Not relief exactly, more like recognition. The acknowledgement that she had crossed a threshold and survived. He stepped back and Catherine felt the change immediately. He was lighter, free. For the first time in more than a century, he could leave. "How long?" she asked Mira. "Transfer is complete. Clock starts now. You have 24 hours. Mira's voice was clinical, but Catherine could hear the concern beneath. "I will stay with you. Monitor your condition. If you start to fail, I can force the transfer back early, but that has its own risks." "No early transfer. We complete the mission." Catherine looked at Theron. "Go. Elena is expecting you. Do not waste the time I am buying." He hesitated. For a moment, Catherine thought he might refuse, might insist on staying despite the opportunity. Then he nodded once, sharp and military. "I will return within 24 hours. Mira, if anything happens to her, I will keep her alive. You have my oath as healer." Theron left. Catherine heard his footsteps receding, heard a vehicle start, heard the sound fade into distance. Then there was just her and Mira, and the crushing weight of responsibility that felt like it was compressing her bones into diamond. "Tell me something," Mira said, adjusting monitors. "Why did you really do this? And do not tell me it is about historical accuracy." Catherine tried to laugh. It came out as a wheeze. "Because he has been alone for more than a century, filing reports no one reads, maintaining standards no one enforces, holding a position everyone else forgot about. That is dedication to duty I cannot even comprehend. The least I can do is give him 1 day of freedom." "You barely know him." "I know he has spent over a century doing what he was ordered to do, even after everyone who gave the orders died or forgot about him. I know he maintained his honor when no one was watching. That tells me everything I need to know about who he is." Mira was quiet for a moment. "You are either very wise or very foolish. Historians are always both. It is in the job description." Hours passed. Catherine sat in the command post, Mira nearby, the ward stone now glowing faintly blue in response to her presence. She could feel everything. Deer moving through the forest, birds landing on ancient walls, the slow shift of seasons that the land understood even if humans tried to impose calendar dates. It was overwhelming and beautiful and absolutely terrible. She also felt the moment armed forces crossed the boundary. "We have incoming," she said. Mira looked up sharply. 8 individuals. Western approach. Moving tactical. Steel Dominion signature. How can you tell? I can feel their intent. They are not curious. They are not scared. They are mission-focused. This is an operation. Catherine's eyes were closed, but she could see them anyway, could sense their positions like pieces on a chessboard. They are breaching the perimeter now. Mira pulled out a phone, started typing rapidly. I am calling Elena, getting backup. They will not arrive in time. This is happening now. The forces entered the main hall 20 minutes later. Catherine had not moved from her position. When they found her, sitting calmly at the command table with monitors glowing around her, the team leader from before stopped short. Dr. Marlowe, where is Blackwood? Not here. Do not lie to me. We have thermal tracking. We know he has not left. Your thermal tracking is wrong, or rather, it is reading me. I am the one holding the wards now. Catherine opened her eyes, looking at him directly. He transferred the binding, temporarily, which means you just deployed armed response against a civilian historian who is currently sovereign authority over this territory under shifter law. That is a treaty violation. The team leader's expression went through several rapid changes: confusion, disbelief, calculation, finally settling on something that looked like respect mixed with frustration. Cassian said you were smart. He did not mention you were insane. I prefer committed. Now you can leave peacefully and we can pretend this did not happen. Or you can try to remove me by force and I can activate every defensive ward in this citadel, including the lethal ones. Your choice. She was bluffing. She had no idea how to activate defensive wards, but they did not know that. And the ward stone was glowing brighter now, responding to her elevated heart rate and the adrenaline flooding her system. It looked dangerous. That was enough. We are leaving, but this is not over. Colonel Steele will be very interested to hear about this development. I am sure he will. Tell him I expect a formal apology for multiple violations of academic research protections. I have excellent lawyers. They left. Catherine held herself together until she heard engines fading into distance. Then she slumped forward, the pain and exhaustion catching up with her all at once. That was extremely stupid, Mira said, but there was admiration in her voice. Also extremely effective. They believed you would actually kill them. I would have found a way, probably. Catherine's vision was blurring. How much longer? 18 hours. You are holding up better than I expected, but your vitals are concerning. Blood pressure too high, heart rate too elevated. You cannot maintain this much longer. I will maintain as long as necessary. Time moved strangely under the weight of the binding. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like seconds. Catherine drifted in and out of sharp focus, maintaining consciousness through sheer stubborn will. Mira monitored equipment, occasionally forcing fluids or nutrients into Catherine's system. The pain never lessened. But Catherine learned to exist beside it, rather than inside it. At hour 23, as Catherine was beginning to wonder if she had miscalculated the limits of human endurance, she felt Theron return, felt him cross the boundary, felt his relief at finding the citadel intact and her still conscious. He entered the command post and stopped, taking in the scene. Catherine pale and shaking, Mira looking exhausted, the monitors showing vitals that should not belong to anyone still upright and aware. Did you pass? Catherine asked. Her voice was a rasp. Elena says I am still insufferably rigid about military protocol, but my sanity appears intact. She will testify. He moved to her side, kneeling. Now let me take this back before you die of stubbornness. Only mostly dead of stubbornness. That is not funny. Little bit funny. The transfer back was faster than the initial binding, but somehow worse. Catherine felt the weight lifting, felt the connection to the land severing, and in that moment understood why Alara had wept. Not for herself, for Theron, for binding someone to this crushing responsibility and knowing he would carry it alone. Then it was gone. The pain vanished. The weight disappeared. Catherine gasped, her body remembering how to exist without carrying a mountain of obligation. She felt empty and light and strangely bereft. Theron caught her as she collapsed, lowering her carefully to the floor. I have you. You did it. 24 hours exactly. You did it. Elena? She had to know. Had to be sure it mattered. Elena will testify. She says you are either the bravest or stupidest person she has met in 50 years. Possibly both. His voice was rough with an emotion Catherine did not have the energy to name. Thank you. for giving me 1 day of freedom, for standing guard while I was gone, for believing this mattered. Catherine managed a weak smile. Someone has to care about the truth. Might as well be us. She slept for 16 hours after that, dreamless and deep. When she woke, Mira was gone, and Theron was seated at the command table, working through documents with the focused intensity of someone preparing for war. "We have 3 weeks," he said when he saw her stirring. "Council hearing is scheduled. Elena will testify in person. Rowan Ashford is coming from the West Coast. Mira has documentation of magical stability. We have everything we need to make the case." "What about Cassian?" "No word yet. But after your display with his tactical team, I imagine he is reconsidering his approach." Catherine sat up, accepting the coffee Theron offered. "What happened with Elena? What did she say to convince her?" Theron was quiet for a long moment. "She asked me if I still remembered the names. All of them. Everyone who died at Blackwood Citadel. Everyone we failed to save." "Do you?" "Every single one. I recite them monthly. Maintenance of memory is maintenance of honor." His voice was soft. That is what convinced her. Not that I was still sane, but that I still cared, that the dead still mattered to me after all these years. Catherine thought about that, about over a century of reciting names, of refusing to forget, of maintaining vigil over memories everyone else had allowed to fade. "You are a good soldier," she said. "I am a stubborn soldier. There is a difference." "No, there really is not." They worked together through the next 2 weeks, building the case that would determine whether Blackwood Citadel remained sovereign territory or became historical footnote. Documents were organized, witnesses were coordinated, legal arguments were refined. It was tedious, meticulous work. It was also the kind of work both of them understood. 2 days before the hearing, Cassian Steele called Catherine's personal line. She almost did not answer. Finally, curiosity won out. "Dr. Marlowe, I wanted to speak with you before the hearing. This should be interesting." His laugh was short and without much humor. "You made my tactical team look like amateurs. Do you know how much paperwork that generates?" "I was not trying to embarrass them. I was trying to protect someone who deserved protection." "I know. That is why I am calling." He paused. "I am withdrawing Steel Dominion's claim to the territory." Catherine's breath caught. "What?" "The evidence is clear. My grandfather falsified intelligence. The war was unjust. Blackwood has maintained continuous occupation. Continuing to contest his claim would be defending a lie, and I am done defending my family's lies." "Your father will never agree to this." "My father is no longer making decisions for Steel Dominion. I am." Cassian's voice was firm. "I will testify at the hearing. I will provide the declassified documents. I will acknowledge what my family did wrong, and then I will recommend the council recognize Blackwood's sovereignty." "Why?" "Because it is the right thing to do. Because I am tired of building my leadership on foundations of genocide and lies. And because you asked me a question that I could not stop thinking about. What do I get out of this? You were right. I have been trying to clean up my grandfather's mess without actually admitting the mess existed. That is not honor. That is just management." He was quiet for a moment. "If I want Steel Dominion to move forward, we need to tell the truth about the past. All of it. Starting with this." Catherine did not trust easy redemption arcs, but she trusted the exhaustion in Cassian's voice, the sound of someone who had spent too many years defending the indefensible and finally admitted defeat. "Your father will not forgive you for this." "I know, but maybe my children will not have to spend their lives defending war crimes. That seems like a fair trade. I will see you at the hearing, Colonel Steele." "Dr. Marlowe, thank you for standing your ground, for forcing me to confront uncomfortable truths, for being the kind of historian the world needs." The line went dead. Catherine stood in the command post, phone in hand, and tried to process what had just happened. Cassian Steele, heir to the family that had tried to exterminate the Northern Coalition, was about to testify on Theron's behalf. History, it seemed, was full of surprises. She found Theron on the ramparts, watching the sun set over territory he had guarded for more than a century. She told him about Cassian's call. He listened without interruption. "Do you believe him?" Theron asked when she finished. "I believe he is tired of carrying his grandfather's sins. Whether that makes him ally or just less hostile enemy remains to be seen." "That is a very historian answer. I am a very historian person." They stood in comfortable silence, watching darkness claim the valley. Catherine thought about the hearing, about witnesses and documents and legal arguments, about the strange coalition of people who had decided the truth mattered more than convenience. "Whatever happens," Theron said quietly, "thank you. For caring when no one else did. For risking yourself for a cause that was not yours. For giving an old soldier one last chance at justice. You are not old, you are 150. That is extremely old. That is distinguished. Distinguished is what you call old when you are being polite." Catherine smiled. "Fair enough. Distinguished soldier it is." The hearing was 3 days away. The outcome was uncertain. But standing on ancient walls with a man who had maintained his honor when no one was watching, Catherine felt something she had not felt in years of academic work. Hope. Maybe the truth did matter. Maybe standing your ground did make a difference. Maybe sometimes, against all odds and expectation, the right side won. Or maybe they were about to walk into a courtroom and get destroyed by political machinery they could not control. Either way, they would face it together. Historian and soldier, human and shifter, two people who had decided that some fights were worth taking regardless of odds, preparing for vindication. The council chamber was older than the conflicts it had been built to resolve. Stone walls that had witnessed 100 years of territorial disputes and political maneuvering rose 3 stories high, their surfaces carved with the names of every alpha who had sat in judgment. The architecture was deliberately intimidating, designed to remind anyone who entered that they stood before powers greater than themselves. Catherine stood in this gallery reserved for witnesses, watching the chamber fill with representatives from packs across the northern territories. 200 wolves, maybe more, their conversations a low rumble of anticipation and speculation. News of the hearing had spread through shifter communities like wildfire. The ghost of Blackwood Citadel seeking recognition after more than a century of isolation. It was the kind of story that demanded attention. Theron sat at the defendant's table with the rigid posture of a soldier at court-martial. He wore the formal uniform of a Northern Coalition commander, carefully preserved, the fabric showing its age, but the bearing of the man wearing it timeless. He had not spoken since they arrived, his attention fixed on the 5 seats that dominated the front of the chamber. The Council of 5, the alphas who would decide his fate. Elena Ravencroft sat in the witness section, her weathered face unreadable. She had arrived the night before, bringing with her 3 other survivors from the Blood Wars, old wolves who moved stiffly but whose eyes still held the sharpness of combat veterans. They were a living reminder that the Northern Coalition had been more than propaganda claimed. They had been people. They had been soldiers. They deserved to be remembered. The doors at the rear of the chamber opened. 5 figures entered in formal procession, each wearing the ceremonial robes that marked their authority. Catherine recognized them from her research, though seeing them in person added weight that photographs could not capture. Chancellor Isla Moonshadow led the procession. She was perhaps 45, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She represented the Coastal Pack, the swing vote that could determine the outcome. Behind her came Chief Garrett Stonefist, a massive man in his 60s whose mountain pack still followed traditions that predated modern shifter politics. Then Ambassador Rowan Emberwild, younger and ambitious, representing the southern territories that had once been Dravensteel's strongest allies. Major Elena's seat came next, though she remained in the witness section rather than taking her place among the council. The Eastern Pack's vote would come through her testimony rather than her authority. It was an unusual arrangement, but one that recognized her unique position as both judge and witness. The final seat belonged to Steel Dominion. Catherine held her breath as the last figure entered. It was not General Victor Steele. Cassian walked to this council table with the controlled precision of someone who knew every eye in the room was evaluating his right to be there. He wore military dress uniform, medals earned rather than inherited displayed on his chest. When he took his seat, his father's seat, the chamber erupted in whispered speculation. Chancellor Isla called the session to order with 3 sharp raps of a gavel that looked older than the building itself. This council convenes to hear the territorial claim of Commander Theron Blackwood, formerly Alpha of the Northern Coalition, currently occupant of the lands designated as the Blackwood Exclusion Zone. Her voice carried the particular authority of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Commander Blackwood, you petition this council for recognition of sovereign territory under your authority. The burden of proof rests with you. Present your case." Theron stood. The movement was smooth, economical, the action of a man who had stood at attention more times than he could count. When he spoke, his voice filled the chamber without shouting, projected with the trained control of someone accustomed to giving orders in combat. "Honored council members, I claim Blackwood Citadel and its associated territories under military occupation doctrine and blood right inheritance. I have maintained continuous presence on that land for over a century. I have preserved its structures, defended its boundaries, and fulfilled all duties of an alpha in residence. I submit that my claim predates and supersedes any subsequent assertions of control." Isla nodded. "The Council acknowledges your petition. We will hear evidence and testimony. Ambassador Emberwild, you represent the historical interests of the Southern Territories. Present the opposition's position." Rowan stood, his expression carefully neutral. "The Southern Territories acknowledge Commander Blackwood's historical connection to the disputed land. However, we contend that abandonment of more than a century, regardless of claimed continuous presence, constitutes forfeiture under established territorial law. Furthermore, we question whether magical compulsion can be considered legitimate occupation rather than imprisonment without agency." It was the argument Catherine had expected. Reasonable, legally sound, difficult to refute without the evidence they had spent weeks gathering. She felt her pulse quicken as Isla turned her attention back to Theron. "Commander Blackwood, how do you respond to the claim of abandonment?" "I never abandoned my post, Chancellor. I was bound to it by circumstances of war. The binding performed by Luna Ilara Moonwhisper was not imprisonment, it was tactical necessity. I maintained all functions of territorial authority throughout the period in question. I submit documentation to support this claim." Catherine moved forward at the signal, carrying the archive boxes they had prepared. Months of decoded reports, carefully organized, cross-referenced with historical records. She set them before the council with the particular care of someone who knew their contents could determine the outcome of everything that mattered. Isla examined the top document, her expression shifting from neutral interest to genuine surprise. "These are situation reports, military documentation filed quarterly for over a century. Yes, Chancellor, I continued to fulfill my duties as Northern Coalition Commander, even after the Coalition itself ceased to exist. I documented territorial conditions, security assessments, and strategic evaluations. I filed them with Northern Command, as protocol required, despite knowing no one was receiving them." Theron's voice remained level, stating facts. "A soldier does not stop being a soldier simply because communications are disrupted." Garrett Stonefist leaned forward, his massive frame making the council chair look small. "You filed reports for over 100 years to a command structure that no longer existed. That is either dedication or madness, Commander. Which would you say it was?" "Both, Chief Stonefist. Also irrelevant. The question before this council is not my mental state. It is whether I maintained continuous occupation. The documentation proves I did." A murmur ran through the gallery. Catherine could feel the mood shifting. What had seemed like the sad delusion of an isolated man was revealing itself as something else entirely. This was a soldier who had never stopped following orders, even when following them required more discipline than anyone should possess. Rowan was not finished. "Documentation proves you were present. It does not prove you had authority. A prisoner in a cell is present. That does not make him warden." He pulled out his own documents, graphs, and sensor data that Catherine recognized from Cassian's presentation weeks ago. "We have evidence that the magical binding is degrading, that within months, possibly weeks, it will fail catastrophically. How does the Council grant territorial sovereignty to someone who may not survive to exercise it?" The chamber went silent. It was the killing blow, the argument that could not be refuted with paperwork. If Theron was a ticking time bomb, if granting him recognition meant potential civilian casualties from magical backlash, then no amount of historical justice would convince the Council to take that risk. Isla's expression was troubled. "Commander Blackwood, do you have evidence to refute the claim of magical instability?" "I have testimony from a healer who has monitored the binding's condition. Dr. Mira Thornfield, if you would approach." Mira rose from the witness section, carrying a tablet loaded with medical and magical sensor data. She was small and unassuming, but when she spoke, her voice carried the absolute confidence of someone who knew her field better than anyone in the room. I have monitored Commander Blackwood's condition for the past 3 months. The binding is stable. Degradation exists, as it would in any magical construct over a century old, but it is proceeding at predictable rates. With proper maintenance, which I can provide, the binding will remain intact for decades. There is no imminent danger of catastrophic failure. Rowan challenged immediately. Steel Dominion sensors show escalating instability, seismic readings consistent with pre-collapse magical feedback. Are you suggesting our equipment is faulty? I am suggesting your equipment is measuring external stress on the wards, not internal binding stability. The wards have been tested repeatedly by unauthorized incursions. Mira's tone was dry, clinical. When armed forces breach a magical perimeter multiple times in a month, sensor readings reflect that activity. It does not indicate the binding itself is failing. Catherine watched Cassian's expression carefully. He showed no surprise at Mira's testimony, no indication that he was hearing this for the first time. He had known. The reports about catastrophic failure, the humanitarian concern about civilian safety, all of it had been based on incomplete data. Whether through incompetence or intentional misrepresentation, Steel Dominion had been operating on false intelligence. The question was whether Cassian had known the intelligence was false. Isla studied Mira's data, then looked to Cassian. Colonel Steele, you represent your family's interests in this matter. How do you respond to Dr. Thornfield's testimony? Cassian stood. The gallery went silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The heir to the family that had destroyed the Northern Coalition, now sitting in judgment of the last survivor. Whatever he said next would define not just the hearing's outcome, but his own leadership. Chancellor Moonshadow, honored council members, I must correct a fundamental misunderstanding about who I represent in these proceedings. His voice was calm, measured. I do not represent Steel Dominion's interests in contesting Commander Blackwood's claim. I represent Steel Dominion in supporting it. The chamber erupted. Shouts of confusion, disbelief, anger. Isla's gavel cracked 3 times before order was restored. In the gallery, Catherine saw an older man, gray-haired and furious, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. General Victor Steele, she realized, Cassian's father, leaving rather than witness his son's betrayal. Explain yourself, Colonel, Isla commanded. Cassian pulled documents from his briefcase, setting them on the council table with deliberate precision. These are my grandfather's personal journals, declassified when my father stepped down from active command. They contain detailed plans for false flag operations conducted against Northern Coalition territories, calculations about acceptable civilian casualties, strategies for post-war narrative control. They are, in essence, a confession to war crimes. The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine could hear her own heartbeat, feel the weight of more than a century of buried truth finally surfacing. Chancellor Draven Steele orchestrated the Blood Wars not as defensive response to Northern aggression, but as calculated genocide. He targeted the Northern Coalition because they represented a political and economic threat to Steel dominance. He killed Luna Alara Moonwhisper because her diplomatic skills and moon-chosen status made her impossible to control through conventional means. Cassian's voice never wavered. My family built our current power on lies, on mass murder, and on the erasure of inconvenient history. I will not compound those crimes by continuing to contest a legitimate territorial claim. Rowan was on his feet. Colonel Steele, are you aware that what you are presenting could result in reparations demands? Could destabilize territorial agreements that have held for over a century? Yes, Ambassador, I am aware. I am also aware that building leadership on foundations of genocide is morally bankrupt and strategically unsustainable. If Steel Dominion is to have any legitimacy going forward, it must start by acknowledging what we did wrong. He looked directly at Theron. Commander Blackwood, on behalf of my family, I offer formal apology for the destruction of the Northern Coalition and the murder of Luna Alara Moonwhisper. I acknowledge the injustice done to your people, and I recommend this council recognize your territorial sovereignty without condition or limitation. Theron stood slowly. For a long moment he simply looked at Cassian. Catherine could not read his expression. Over a century of isolation, of waiting, of maintaining honor when no one was watching, and now the heir to his enemy's legacy was offering what might be justice or might be another political maneuver. I accept your apology, Colonel Steele, Theron said finally. Not because it changes what happened, Not because it brings back the dead, but because it takes courage to admit when your family is wrong. That matters. Isla let the moment settle before speaking again. The council will hear additional testimony. Major Ravencroft, you served under Commander Blackwood during the Blood Wars. You witnessed the final assault on Blackwood Citadel. Approach and testify. Elena walked to the witness stand with the careful movements of someone whose body remembered old injuries. She did not sit. Instead, she stood at attention, addressing the council with the bearing of a soldier giving operational debrief. I am Major Elena Ravencroft, formerly of the Northern Coalition's Eastern Defense Command. I served under Commander Blackwood for 12 years. I was present during the final assault. I witnessed Luna Ilara's death and the casting of the binding. Her voice was clear, factual. I am here to testify to 3 things. First, Commander Blackwood maintained exemplary leadership under impossible conditions. Second, the Northern Coalition was defending against unprovoked aggression, not instigating conflict. Third, the binding was not imprisonment. It was sacrifice. She paused, her gaze sweeping the gallery. Luna Ilara cast the binding because Commander Blackwood wanted to die. Wanted to charge Draven's forces in a suicide attack that would have accomplished nothing except giving him an honorable death. She bound him to life because the Northern Coalition needed hope, needed the legal claim to remain active, needed someone to remember what really happened when all the convenient lies were being written into history. She wept when she cast the spell, not for herself, though she knew it would kill her, for him, because she was condemning someone she loved to decades, possibly centuries, of isolation. She told me right before the end, when the historian comes, tell her the binding was mercy. Elena's voice roughened slightly. I did not understand then. I thought it was cruelty, but I understand now. She gave him purpose when he wanted death. She made sure someone would survive to tell the truth. That is mercy of a kind most of us will never possess the strength to offer. Isla's expression was unreadable. You believe Commander Blackwood has maintained his honor throughout his isolation? I know he has. I tested him myself 3 weeks ago. He remembers every name, every soldier who died defending Blackwood Citadel, every civilian we failed to evacuate. He recites them monthly, has been doing so for over a century. Elena's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been fury. That is not madness. That is duty maintained when no one was watching. That is honor in its purest form. Thank you, Major. You may step down. Isla consulted with the other council members in whispered conference. Finally, she addressed the chamber again. This council will hear closing statements. Ambassador Emberwild, the Southern Territories may speak first. Rowan stood, though his expression suggested he knew the battle was already lost. The Southern Territories acknowledge the compelling testimony presented today. However, we must consider precedent. If the Council grants sovereignty based on magical occupation of contested territory, what message does that send? Every rogue alpha with access to old magic could claim abandoned lands and demand recognition. We must think carefully about the long-term implications. It was a valid point, Catherine thought. The kind of argument that could sway minds focused on political stability rather than historical justice. She held her breath as Isla turned to Theron. Commander Blackwood, your closing statement. Theron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the military formality that had characterized his earlier testimony. This was personal. This was the man behind the uniform. Honored council members, I did not ask for over a century of isolation. I did not ask to watch the world change while I remained frozen in time. I would have preferred to die with my people, fighting for something I believed in. But that choice was taken from me by someone who loved me enough to force me to keep living. He paused. I filed those reports because I am a soldier. Soldiers follow orders. Soldiers maintain their posts. Soldiers do not abandon their duty simply because it becomes difficult or lonely or seemingly pointless. I do not ask this council for reward. I do not ask for reparations or acknowledgement of suffering. I ask only for recognition that I maintained my post, that the land I stand on was never abandoned, that the Northern Coalition, though destroyed, was never truly defeated as long as someone remembered and honored what it stood for. His voice strengthened. You ask about precedent. Here is the precedent I offer: a soldier who keeps faith when faith becomes its own punishment, a man who maintains honor when no one is watching, a commander who refuses to surrender even when surrender would be mercy. If that is not worthy of recognition, then I do not know what is." The chamber was silent. Catherine could see the impact of his words in the faces around her. This was not political maneuvering. This was not legal strategy. This was simply the truth, stated plainly, by someone who had earned the right to speak it. Isla looked to her fellow council members. "We will now vote. Chief Stonefist, your assessment?" Garrett's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "The Mountain Pack values tradition, values honor, values keeping faith with the old ways when the new ways prove hollow. Commander Blackwood has demonstrated all of these. I vote to recognize his territorial sovereignty." Ambassador Emberwild? Rowan looked uncomfortable. "The Southern Territories appreciate the complexity of this situation. We acknowledge the testimony presented. However, we must abstain from this vote. We cannot support a decision that may destabilize existing territorial agreements." An abstention. Not opposition, Catherine realized, but not support either. Rowan was playing it safe, avoiding the political fallout regardless of outcome. "Colonel Steele?" Cassian's answer was immediate. "Steel Dominion votes to recognize Commander Blackwood's sovereignty. Furthermore, we formally withdraw any historical claims to the disputed territory and acknowledge the legitimacy of the Northern Coalition's original territorial boundaries." 2 votes in favor, 1 abstention. The outcome would depend on Isla's decision. Catherine felt her throat tighten. After everything, after weeks of preparation and risk and sacrifice, it came down to this: 1 vote, 1 decision. Isla studied Theron for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I have spent 3 decades on this council. I have heard hundreds of territorial disputes. I have witnessed political theater masquerading as justice more times than I can count. This case is different." She stood, her formal robes rustling in the silence. "Commander Blackwood, you have presented compelling evidence of continuous occupation. You have demonstrated that the binding, while unusual, did not remove your agency or your ability to fulfill duties of territorial authority. You have shown that the Northern Coalition was victim of aggression, not perpetrator. Most importantly, you have proven something I did not think could be proven." She paused, letting the moment build. "You have proven that honor, true honor, can survive more than a century of isolation, can survive being forgotten, can survive having every reason to give up, to become bitter, to let the responsibilities slip away. You maintained your post when no one would have blamed you for abandoning it. That level of dedication deserves recognition." Isla's gavel fell once, sharp and final. "The Coastal Pack votes to recognize Commander Theron Blackwood as Sovereign Alpha of Blackwood Territory, with all rights and privileges thereof. The motion carries 3 votes in favor, 1 abstention. Commander Blackwood, this council formally acknowledges your claim." The chamber erupted. Cheers from some quarters, angry shouts from others. Catherine felt tears she had not known she was holding back spill down her cheeks. Theron remained standing at attention, his expression carefully controlled, but she could see the slight tremor in his hands. The weight of more than a century suddenly lifted. Isla's gavel restored order. "This hearing is concluded. Documentation will be filed with all territorial registries. Blackwood Territory is hereby recognized as sovereign land under Alpha Theron Blackwood's authority. This council is adjourned." The formal language could not contain what had just happened. Justice, Catherine thought, not perfect, not complete, but real. A man who had maintained his honor when no one was watching had finally been seen. The aftermath was controlled chaos. Well-wishers crowding forward to offer congratulations. Media representatives shouting questions. Elena gripping Theron's shoulder with fierce pride. Catherine hung back, letting him have this moment. This was his victory, his vindication. She was just the historian who had helped document it. But then Theron's eyes found hers across the crowded chamber. He pushed through the press of bodies, moving with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. When he reached her, he did not speak. He simply extended his hand. Catherine took it. The gesture was formal, military, but the pressure of his grip said what words could not. "Thank you for believing, for standing witness, for caring when no one else did." "We did it," she said quietly. You did it. I just stood here and told the truth. You made them listen. Someone had to. She smiled through tears. Besides, I needed a good thesis defense story. This will do. His laugh was short and rough, the sound of someone who had not practiced laughing for a very long time. Historian humor. I will never understand it. Cassian approached, moving carefully through the crowd. When he reached them, he stood at a respectful distance, acknowledging that he was not quite welcome yet. Trust would take time. Commander Blackwood, I meant what I said. About the apology. About moving forward. He hesitated. My father has disowned me, called me traitor to the family name. I expected that. What I did not expect was how right it feels to finally stop defending the indefensible. Theron studied him. Your grandfather killed hundreds of my people, destroyed everything I fought to protect. An apology does not undo that. I know. But you stood up in front of the entire shifter community and admitted your family was wrong. That takes more courage than any battle. I respect courage, even when it comes from unexpected sources. Theron extended his hand. I am not ready to call you friend, Colonel Steele, but I can call you honorable opponent. That is a start. Cassian took the offered hand. That is more than I deserve. Thank you. As Cassian moved away, Elena appeared at Theron's elbow. The press wants interviews. The council wants to discuss transition procedures. And about 40 young wolves want to pledge to your pack. You are going to be very busy, Commander. I have been waiting over a century to be busy. I think I can handle it. Good. Because I am too old to help you rebuild. But I know some people who are not. Elena's smile was sharp. Welcome back to the living, Blackwood. Try not to waste this second chance. The next several hours passed in administrative blur. Paperwork to formalize territorial boundaries. Discussions about resource allocation. Media interviews where Theron demonstrated he could be professional and diplomatic when required. Catherine stayed close, part advisor, part witness to history unfolding in real time. By evening, they finally escaped to a hotel suite Elena had arranged. Theron stood at the window, looking out at a city that had not existed the last time he had been free to travel. The lights stretched to the horizon, evidence of over a century of change he had missed while standing guard over ruins. Strange, he said quietly. I spent so long imagining this moment. Recognition, victory, justice. I thought it would feel different. How does it feel? Catherine joined him at the window. Incomplete. The dead are still dead. The coalition is still destroyed. Elara is still gone. He was quiet for a moment. But maybe that is the point. Justice does not undo tragedy. It just acknowledges that tragedy happened and mattered. That might have to be enough. It is more than most people get. Yes, thanks to you. He turned to face her. What will you do now? Your research is complete. Your thesis material is beyond what any historian could hope for. You could write your own ticket at any university in the country. Catherine had been thinking about that question for days. The logical answer was obvious. Return to academic life. Publish papers about the blood wars that would reshape historical understanding. Build a career on the story of Theron Blackwood and the Northern Coalition's last stand. But she found herself hesitating. I could do that, or I could stay. Stay? You are going to be rebuilding Blackwood territory from scratch, recruiting a pack, establishing governance systems, navigating modern political landscape while maintaining historical legitimacy. That is going to require someone who understands both worlds, someone who can translate between military tradition and contemporary bureaucracy, someone who knows your story well enough to prevent it from being distorted again. She met his eyes. I think I'm qualified for that position. Theron's expression was unreadable. You would give up academic career to be advisor to a newly recognized alpha with no resources and questionable prospects? I would give up academic career to document the rebuilding of something worth preserving, to be part of living history rather than just studying dead history, to work with someone who has proven that honor matters even when maintaining it costs everything. She smiled. Also, the coffee at Blackwood Citadel is terrible. Someone needs to fix that. The coffee is a matter of limited supply, not preference. See? Already you need civilian oversight. He studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the beginning of one. The first tentative sign that a man who had been frozen in grief for over a century might be learning to feel something else. I would be honored to have you stay, Dr. Marlowe. Though I should warn you, Rebuilding a pack from nothing is not going to be easy. There will be political opposition, resource challenges, wolves who think I am too old-fashioned, wolves who think I am not old-fashioned enough. It will be exhausting and frustrating and occasionally infuriating. Sounds like academic committee meetings. I will manage. Theron's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting to something that might have been concern. What is it? Message from Mira. She says we need to talk about something she noticed in Victor Steele's behavior patterns during the hearing. He pocketed the phone. Apparently, he did not just storm out. He was making calls, coordinating with someone. Catherine felt a chill. You think he is planning something? Victor spent his entire life defending his father's legacy. Cassian just publicly destroyed it. Men like Victor do not walk away from that kind of humiliation quietly. Theron's voice was grim. We won today, but the fight is not over. Then we stay vigilant. Yes. He looked at her seriously. Together. 3 months later, Catherine stood on the ramparts of Blackwood Citadel and watched the sun rise over territory that was finally, officially, home to something other than ghosts and obligation. The repairs had begun. The Great Hall had new roof timbers. The barracks were being converted into livable housing. The command post now had modern communications equipment alongside Alara's ancient wardstones. It was a strange blend of old and new, tradition and necessity, but it was working. The pack was small. 43 wolves, most of them young, all of them drawn by the story of the Alpha who had waited more than a century for vindication. They were rough around the edges, learning military discipline that most modern packs had abandoned decades ago. But they were committed. They believed in what Blackwood territory represented. Second chances. Honor maintained against impossible odds. The possibility that doing the right thing mattered even when no one was watching. Theron emerged from the command post carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to Catherine. It was actually good coffee, purchased from supply lines they had established through Elena's network. Small victories. Mira confirmed her suspicions, he said without preamble. Victor has been recruiting. Old guard wolves who remember the blood wars, who believe the Northern Coalition got what they deserved. She estimates 20, maybe 30 followers so far. Catherine's hand tightened on the coffee mug. What does he want? What men like Victor always want. To prove his father was right. To reclaim the narrative. To finish what Draven started. Theron's voice was calm, but Catherine could hear the steel beneath. Mira thinks he is building toward something. Small operations first. Testing responses. Building capability. An insurgency. Yes. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the valley in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, an old wolf was gathering forces, building an army from bitterness and nostalgia and refusal to accept that the world had moved on. We knew this would not be easy, Catherine said quietly. No, but we also knew it would be worth it. Theron looked at her. Whatever comes next, we face it the same way we face the Council, with truth, with preparation, with the certainty that some fights matter more than safety. Catherine thought about that, about the choice she had made 3 months ago to stay, about the work still ahead, about the fact that winning recognition had not ended the conflict, just changed its shape. I should write to Cassian, she said. Warn him. If Victor is recruiting, he needs to know. Already done. Cassian is coordinating with Elena, building intelligence network, preparing response protocols. Theron's expression was grim. We are not alone in this fight. That is new. That is progress. A howl rose from the forest beyond the citadel walls. Then another. Then a chorus. Morning roll call, the ancient tradition Theron had reintroduced. Every voice accounted for, every member of the pack acknowledged. It was old-fashioned and unnecessary in an age of digital communications. It was also beautiful. Theron's hand found hers. Not romantic, not yet, but companionship, partnership, the acknowledgement that they were in this together, whatever came next. Thank you, he said quietly, for staying, for believing this was worth building, for standing witness to what comes next. Catherine squeezed his hand. Someone has to care about the truth. Might as well be us. The pack howled again, voices rising in chorus, old tradition meeting new purpose, past and present woven together in sound. It was rough around the edges, imperfect, still learning harmony. It was also exactly right. The sun climbed higher. The wind carried the scent of pine and possibility. Somewhere in the northern mountains, Victor Steele was gathering forces, building an army, preparing for war. Let him come, Catherine thought. Let him try. They had beaten history once. They could do it again. The stone walls of Blackwood Citadel stood witness, as they had for more than a century. But they were not witnessing solitude anymore. They were witnessing beginning, and that made all the difference.